So, about 2 days ago, I just got back from my summer house, and I'm actually still kind of reacclimating myself to the time change. Um, but I'd like to give you a sort of a short recap of my journey, as well as a little bit of my time there. So to start with, we did indeed, for those of you who saw my previous video regarding my thoughts on flying, you probably heard that I was looking at using Lyft to I was looking at using Lyft to get to the airport. Well, we actually tried that, and it turned out to be cheaper than a cab. And the vehicle that answered my call was a Hyundai Elantra. And the driver, she was very nice. She was very conversational, and everything went really well. It was my first time actually riding in a Hyundai like that, and a newer Elantra. We rented two generations of Elantra, one in 2003 and again in 2010. But otherwise, I haven't really been in an Elantra since then, and I really liked it a lot. So once we get to the airport, we get checked in, check our bags, then we get to the TSA security checkpoint. So I packed my Nintendo Switch. They asked me, "Do you have a Nintendo Switch?" I was like, "Yeah." And they're all like, "Well, we're going to have you remove it, and we're going to need to get a closer look at it." And I'm like, "Okay." So I go through the detector. Everything else goes smoothly. I repack. Then I get over to the bench to get my shoes back on. For those of you who do not know, you do need to take off your shoes at security and put them in a bin. Along with your laptop, anything in your pockets has to be emptied out. So anyway, I get over to the bench and I start to put my shoes on and I check my backpack and I realize my Nintendo Switch is missing. Now I know exactly what happened. It was still over at security. My concern was that, we better get back over there before they discard it. I hope they didn't find something wrong with it. It's just a simple game system. How could that be harmful? And just as I was about to head back over there, the agent comes over and hands it back to me. She was actually talking about the Nintendo Switch and totally forgot to hand my unit back to me. But I just wanted to thank you so much for that, because you never know what to expect with these security checkpoints. So once that was done, we hop on a Tram, an automated people mover system, and I talked about this in my last video, and for those of you who have not seen that, so what the automated people mover system is, as its name suggests, is an automated train that can move people and their luggage, usually throughout airports, although in some instances, like you see here, it can be used in light rail mass transit operations that are not too terribly high demand. But for the most part, you'll see them in airports, mine included, and a really interesting surprise popped up this time. One of our local outfits, one of our local businesses, decided to advertise on the inside of the vehicle. That's the first time I've ever seen that, and I honestly didn't like it. Because, yes, it was a wrap, but they didn't use the semi-transparent wrap material like on the windows. Instead, they used, everything was 100% opaque, and even on the front window here, let me zoom in so you can see. Oops, I was zoomed in. Let me use the magnifier to zoom in. You won't be able to see me for a moment. So about right here at the halfway point, the entire view was obstructed. All this window here, the door windows were clear. The middle window and the back window, or the front window, whichever direction the tram is going, because basically there is no front and there is no back. Anyway, all the windows were covered in advertising, and I'm thinking to myself, great, obstructive view for tourists who might actually be into this sort of thing. I was not happy about that. In fact, I was so not happy about that that when I got back, we ended up in the same tram car again, going back to the main terminal. And it turned out that somebody or something managed to tear away a little bit at the sign here on the main windscreen. And my literal reaction was, good for them. Not that I have anything against businesses or advertising. I'm just saying that if you're going to do it, don't obstruct the view for the passengers. So I wanted to talk real quick a little bit about what I was talking about, how there's no front and there's no back. There are 4 lights in the front of the vehicle. 2 on the outermost edge are front headlights, and directly inward from that are 2 red rear lights. And when the tram reaches the end of the line, the lights will reverse so that the front becomes the back and the back becomes the front. And it just goes back and forth like that. So yeah, there's no need for these to back up. They literally just reverse direction. For those of you who are old enough, if you remember the automatic reverse cassette players you may have had in your car, same deal. Pretty much the same deal as how these work, in the sense that they don't stop and turn around, or in the case of a tape, stop and rewind. They just literally reverse their wheel direction and head back the other way, which I honestly really like. It's a lot more convenient, I think, and it makes me wonder why some cars, they've tried this design with cars that you actually drive yourself. What was that me? I think I came up with a design once that had like 360-degree steering to the point where you could literally turn around in your parking space and then head back out the other way. Or was that somebody else? I don't know. Either I thought that up or somebody else did. But
9 o'clock.
The point is, that's how these work, and I honestly think it's a very efficient system. Then we get onto our first aircraft, a Boeing 737-900. We flew Delta, and I always like Delta because I know that we're going to get some on-screen in-flight entertainment. And it's really cool the way this works. So I'm going to zoom in here so you can see better. On the left-hand side, it's basically a touch screen interface. And on the left-hand side, you've got a menu, and from top to bottom, they got Spotlight. I didn't touch that. Movies, series is in TV shows, audio is in music. My Flight, I used that a lot. I was very interested in the metrics, the altitude, the outside temperature, our ground speed, and also the map. There's an About Delta section. Games, I didn't touch the games. There was also more. Now here's the thing. In order for me to see this, I actually had to get in pretty close. Okay? And as I mentioned in my last video, I love to fly, but I can't stand the turbulence. That's one of the reasons I was so closely monitoring everything, because the captain had come on and said that they were expecting a mostly smooth flight until just before we started our descent, when he was expecting us to fly around some major thunderstorms. Yeah, so it was about 30 minutes of bumpiness, and I was watching a couple of movies to keep myself occupied. But now that I'm getting an up-close look, I was about to say I don't know if these are... I was going to say these are not accessible, but now I genuinely don't know if they are accessible for people that are speech users, because I'm looking up here at the settings cog. I don't recall having touched that. If I did, I don't remember what's in there. And also this More tab, I didn't touch that either. So I can't say for sure if it's accessible or not. I know a couple of people have wanted me to check into that. And on initial glance, it doesn't appear to be. but don't quote me on that. If you're going to fly Delta, I would contact them and see if their Delta Studio is accessible. Maybe not, if it's not accessible through their main entertainment interface on the aircraft, perhaps, their app might be accessible. I didn't bother trying that because I wanted to save my battery power on my phone. So the movies that I watched, one of them was called The Female Brain, and I would think it to be drama. It's basically, it's a comedy drama about this scientist who's doing research on emotional reaction and what areas of the female brain light up. And during the movie, she does voiceover, the actress that plays her, she does voiceover narration about various parts of the brain, how they work, etc., etc. But it was a funny little movie because the subject, who she concludes has no empathy at all, basically tries to make a move on her. And the assistant, this rather bubbly personality type, fresh out of college type person, was so happy about this that she basically tries to set them up, much to the doctor's chagrin. But it's a fun little movie. For those of you who are wondering, I did check Google Play. It's not available there yet. But if you do fly Delta, it is on Delta Studio if you're interested. So then we get to our hub, which is in Detroit, and we have to ride the express tram. Now this express tram is actually very different from the one that's in my airport and most other airports. This tram doesn't have wheels. It doesn't utilize magnets. Do you see this pulley system here along the side of the guideway? And then there's a metal plate here on the bottom, and you'll actually see, if you can see and you're looking out the front windscreen as you're moving along, you will see notices of caution, high voltage. This is basically a sideways turned elevator is how this works. There are two of these. You can probably see, for those of you who can see the other one in the distance. Now there's a single track that spans the length of the terminal. So how they are able to have two of these people movers operating without bumping into each other is one of them, and I think it randomly varies. They switch them up so that both doors in particular can get equal use in terms of wear and tear. But one of the vehicles will proceed straight, and then the other vehicle will proceed on a curve and end up at the central station, where you have one train going one way, the other train going the other way. On the stations at either end of the terminal, they have only one station. Okay, so anyway, we were on this, and it is so, if you're flying through Detroit Metro, Wayne County, and you have a connection of less than an hour, don't walk. You've got to use the tram, or you're going to end up possibly missing your connection. And I say that because if you have a 1 hour connection, in your mind, tell yourself that's 30 minutes. Because that 1 hour is from the time you get to your destination, your connection, to the time when your connecting flight actually closes the door and departs from the gate. So, like I said, if it's 1 hour, tell yourself it's 30 minutes. And if that's the case, don't walk through the terminal. You're going to end up, unless you happen to have somebody, because a lot of times if you're blind, they'll offer wheelchair assistance, and I personally didn't accept that because I was flying with somebody. If I ever end up losing my vision completely one of these days, I might end up doing that. But unless you have somebody who happens to be a jogger as a skycap, you're not going to make your flight. So I would definitely take the express tram. It only is a few minutes from the south to the central terminal station, and then from the terminal station to the north station, it's only a couple more minutes. It is super quick, super easy, and the tram is big enough to where they can hold, I'd say, at least a plane's worth of people. Now, with these trams, There are very few seats. You probably see these steel poles through the vehicle. There are central seating, at least in the express tram, on the sides. And they are metal benches. They are usually located roughly about the center of the vehicle. And the same goes for the other tram that I showed you. There are seats on the ends, but not in the middle. And the idea is they want to maximize space. Okay? They want to maximize space so that they have less waiting time and less chance of missing your flight, you know? Excuse me. So, excuse me. In my case, I used the bench because I knew that I was going to have a lot of walking to do, and I don't do well standing for long periods of time. So I sat on one of the benches and I used the pole. You need to use the pole, otherwise you'll fall over backwards. I'm dead serious about that. So anyway, we get off the tram and we head to our connecting flight, which is a regional jet, a Canadair 900, CRJ 900 regional jet. So I was, where was I? I think about here. And it was a relatively smooth flight, pretty quick. I mean, we were literally up in the air and back on the ground in 20 minutes. So nothing really to complain about there. But on the flight back, whole other deal, and you'll see what I mean later on. So we get to the airport, we get our bags, and we line up at the rental car counter. We rented from Budget. Now, we've rented from Budget as a family for, oh good grief, we've rented from there at least for 20 years off and on. Every now and then, we usually go with whatever's cheapest, but more often than not in the past, it's usually been Budget. So we're very familiar with them. And so we asked for a mid-sized, and the lady's like, well, the only thing I've got that fits into your category is a Mazda CX3. And I told, and you know, my mother was with me at the time, and I said to her, I said, so basically that's a small SUV, and the lady's like, no, that's a car. She was wrong. But she did say, the lady at the counter, you know, I respect you, everything and all that, but you were wrong. She said the only other option that they could give us was a Hyundai Accent, and honestly, I think that, the Elantra, and I think we would have been better off with the Elantra. That said, what they gave us was not bad. It was a quirky little thing. It was a Mazda CX3, and it looks like a wagon, but it's technically a compact crossover SUV. The back seat was cramped. Luggage space left a bit to be desired. But it was a zippy little thing. Mazda's supposed to be the sporty Japanese brand, basically. And it was a fun little drive. It had about 8,000 miles on it. It had CD player, standard infotainment options, although they were a bit limited. This is the interior. This is our entertainment system. And these days, the way cars are being designed, they've got entertainment systems that are basically floating touch screens on the dashboard. And you've got things like your music, your contacts. I didn't bother syncing my phone with this. My personal rule about syncing phones in rental cars is if you absolutely need to, go ahead and do it. Otherwise, don't. And if I do sync my phone, I always take it upon myself to delete not just my records, but every single other renter's records out of the stereo system. Do them a favor and try to protect their privacy. Call me paranoid, I don't care. But, so it was a pretty basic system. We did get heated seats, but they weren't much use to us anyway. They worked, but I'm saying it was too hot to use them. We got a couple of standard USB ports and a 12-volt power outlet, which I used the 12-volt for our portable GPS. Standard automatic transmission, 6-speed. We did get a CD player. Now here's the interesting part about this. The main stereo head, quote-unquote, head unit, which is to say that back on older cars they had this little box about like that. And in this box you had your cassette player, CD player, your AM/FM receiver, that sort of thing. Well, like I said, nowadays, because people are mostly going to streaming media, they've gone to more integrated systems that are literally built into the dashboard. And you probably, if you go to Best Buy, you go to their audio section, you'll see a lot of car stereos. Those are good on vehicles probably up to the mid-2000s, mid to late 2000s, because starting in 2010, a lot of manufacturers went with this more integrated approach. I know Honda did that on their 2004 Accord, such that if you wanted to outfit a new stereo system, you pretty much had to take out the entire dash in order to do it. And in this system, it'd be even more complicated, because here's your main head unit up here. Your CD player is down here in front of the stick, the gear shift, and the controls, because you don't have just the touchscreen, you've also got some physical controls. The physical controls for the stereo are down here by the handbrake. So you've got your physical stereo controls down here by the handbrake. You've got your CD player on the dash and low on the dash in front of the AC, in front of the gear shift underneath the AC controls. And then you've got your main head unit screen up here above the dashboard, which means that if anybody wanted to customize their stereo, good luck. It's basically impossible with newer cars these days. We also got push button start. Now, I'm personally indifferent to it, but my mother, who was driving, took a while to get used to it, which I can understand. I mean, you're used to one car, you have to get used to another car. In fact, when we got back, she had to get used to our car again. Especially because with the air conditioning controls, the central and left knobs are reversed. In the Mazda, the central knob is your fan speed and the left dial is your temperature control. Well, in our personal car, which is a Nissan Sentra, the controls are reversed, and you can imagine that can be confusing. So one thing I didn't like about the vehicle was the choice of color. The exterior was white, that's fine. The interior was black, leatherette seats. Not a wise decision in the heat, particularly since a lot of the time we parked outside. And there were times when we would go to get in the car at our summer house, and it was hot. It was so hot that we could barely sit in there. My mother could barely handle the steering wheel, and it got to the point where we actually had to start the car up about 5 minutes before we got ready to go and get the AC on maximum and get everything cooled off. So yeah. Needless to say, I think, Mom was kind of sorry to see it go because she said it was a fun drive, but she thought it looked rather weird. I personally didn't mind it because I knew that's the sort of design a lot of cars were going for these days. Being that it was a compact SUV, this had no trunk release, and that was fun trying to figure that out. It took us all 10 minutes because apparently there were 2 buttons on the back of the trunk, not just the one. On modern cars these days, you search for a little rubber rectangle, you press the rubber rectangle, and that opens the trunk. On the Mazda, there are 2 of them. The one that opens the trunk is directly beneath the rear logo. And so it's beneath the rear logo, and the one that locks and unlocks is to the right. While in our home car, that button is to the right where the lock and unlock is on the Mazda. So you can see that being a problem. And also we managed to jimmy it into some sort of mode where the trunk wouldn't open because the car was running or some sort of crazy thing. Turns out I think the trunk was just locked. And at the time we didn't know it. So when we get there, we get in the car, we get to our hotel. Now, I was talking about a moment ago about the summer house. Well, where we landed was about a 3-hour drive, and we weren't up to making that drive just after spending a day of flying. So we checked into an econo lodge, and that was neat. It was the very first hotel room I'd ever seen with a configuration where you have, now watch my hand over here in the corner, bed, bathroom, bed. I had never seen that, and I thought that was totally cool because both sides got privacy. But there were a couple of quirks. One side got a clock radio, the other didn't. The other side got a DVD player. One side got a DVD player, the other didn't. But it was just for one night, so we were just more concerned about more concerned about just getting a restful night's sleep, especially me, because I was talking to someone on the phone when I got in, and they said I sounded like I was just totally exhausted, like on drugs or some such thing. My voice was just so faint, and I was just like having been hit by a bus, Flying does that to you sometimes. So where I live is surrounded by lush green forests. This is one of the reasons I love it up there. It's very quiet, very peaceful. You're surrounded by trees. It's just honestly very serene, very majestic. Now, if anybody who knows me personally would like me to send them a picture, I'll be more than happy to do that. But in terms of public, and for those of you who are on my Facebook, you probably already saw one of the photos because I just recently changed my cover photo, and that photo happened to be of the lake that my property is on. So if anybody wishes to contact me privately and wants to see it, I'll be happy to show them. But in terms of being out in public, privacy and all that sort of thing. So I just mentioned a moment ago a lake. We do have property on that is lakefront property. Again, for those of you who are on Facebook, you probably saw my that are friends with me on Facebook. You probably saw me change my cover photo. There you go. That's basically the lake that my family property is on. I just love. There was one day when I was up there, and I was in this. I was in one of our. It's an older place. It's a 50-year-old house, and we have a lot of older furniture. And I was in one of the older chairs, and the backrest had been leaned back quite a bit. It was one of those patio chairs, that could withstand a rainstorm, hard plastic, that sort of thing. So I was underneath a tree, and I was listening to the waves. There was a gentle breeze, and I practically fell asleep. I love it up there. I genuinely love it up there, except when the thunderstorms kick in. Then things can get noisy, and I don't like that at all. I really don't. But no, we had a wonderful time. I went in the lake a couple of times. We saw a couple of movies because there's a city not far from where my summer house is, and we went into town and we saw a couple of movies, did some shopping. We ate at a couple of local restaurants that are local to my area that we only get to eat at pretty much once a year. One of them had new ownership, and it was a wonderful experience. I had Indian curry the first time. I loved it. I just loved it. I went into the lake a few times. The second time was rough, and I do mean rough. It was so rough that I tried to swim to get towards a buoy, which basically is a little float, and it's about like cone-shaped, and it just bobbles around, and it's basically supposed to act as a marker for boats. And so I was trying to swim towards the buoy, and the waves were so rough that I literally wasn't going anywhere. And if I stopped, I was headed the opposite direction. So the lake even kissed me on the lips twice. But overall, I just had a fantastic time. Just loved it. and I do wish we could have stayed longer, but that wasn't in the cards this time. I've been going up there since before I could walk. So that particular place has a very deep um, significance to me. All in all good things must come to an end. So we fly out of a different airport than we flew into. We fly in out of one that's a lot closer to us. We flew into the further one because of the rental car rates. But the return was interesting. There was no agent to greet us. We actually just pulled into a spot, went in, and then we had to wait a few minutes to hand our keys over to someone and get a receipt. And then we go back through security. And this time, they didn't have any problem with my Nintendo Switch. But note a moment ago that I talked about a GPS. The TSA agent asked, "Do you have a GPS?" And we were like, "Yes." And she's like, "Well, you're going to have to take it out and put it in the bin." Different strokes for different folks, I suppose. Excuse me. So we get through security, and I use the restroom, and we get onto our plane. This is where things become more interesting, because the instant we got after takeoff, we entered on another CRJ 900 back to Detroit. And so I'm all the way in the back. The instant we get off the ground, there's turbulence. Now, where where we took off from was a smaller airport, and my only guess is that the turbulence came from different aircraft, coming and going. But that didn't make it any less crazy, because about 2 minutes after we get off the ground, we end up with one of those downforce winds that make it feel like there's a sudden drop. I didn't like that, being in the back. I even told the flight attendant as soon as we got back to Detroit, I said, "You guys need to alter your flight announcement and say," what was it? "For those of you who are in the very back row, you'd better have a strong stomach." I don't like being in the back. And, it was funny. The engines were right behind me, and I told myself because of that I couldn't smell the exhaust. Wrong! I smelled the exhaust. Ew. So we get back to Detroit, get on the express tram, head for our gate, and get back on the plane back home. It was another Delta 737-900, and like the outgoing flight, there was Delta Studio. And I occupied myself with some movies, watched Lord of the Rings, monitored the flight. Now, going home, we flew through a major storm patch on our descent. And that's where I really got hesitant and started monitoring the metrics and grabbing the seat for dear life. There was one point where it felt like we were being punched from underneath, and we ended up ascending a few feet and then descending a few feet because, like I said, we were headed down intentionally. And if I wasn't monitoring the metrics, we hardly moved at all in terms of altitude. But had I not been monitoring the metrics, I probably would have not necessarily panicked, but been really worried. So that really, really helped. So much so that I think that on future flights, I'm going to prioritize that, even if it makes the flying more expensive, because for me, it helps calm me. Other than that, pretty uneventful flight. We get home, and we end up taking a cab home. I was hoping we could have tried Lyft again, but we decided to go for a cab because we'd always done that in the past, and we knew how it worked and whatnot. And the cab that we got was a Toyota Prius V. First time I'd ever been in a Prius. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really neat. I felt sorry for the driver, though. He didn't know where we were going. Like we told him where to go, but he definitely wasn't familiar with our area. So there were a couple of times when I got worried that he was really cutting it close with the traffic. He could barely fit in his cab. Poor guy. But we got home, And so ends another wonderful trip. And I say, like I said, another because I've been going up there since I was a kid. Now, I do apologize for the length of this video. I have no idea how long it is. I'd say by now it was probably at least 30 minutes. But I just wanted to go into detail and give a overall impression of my trip. If anybody wants me to go into further details, because this particular video was about my commute to and from and a little bit of my time there. If anybody wants me to go into further detail about my time up there, I'd be happy to do so. Just let me know. Thank you for watching. Comments are welcome, and have a nice day.